Hi, I am reviewing the camera that I'm using to film myself. It is the Sony A7R III. I've been using this camera for about 3 years now. I bought it secondhand in 2021, shortly after the A7 Mark IV came out. I still use it quite frequently, and I thought I'd make a video about if this camera still holds up to this day and if I would recommend it for someone in the market today. The first thing I love about this camera is the image quality. The image quality coming out of this camera is just crazy good. This is a photographer's version of the A7 Mark III with the 42 megapixel full frame sensor. I shoot in low light conditions a lot, and how this camera is able to handle those situations with minimal noise even at higher ISO is really great. Actually, it doesn't get too high in ISO as long as there's some sort of light source. It is really good at keeping the ISO low. If I'm using a camera that is not full frame, I do need to worry about my exposure when I shoot, because I don't want to blow out the highlights, and if I shoot it too dark to protect the highlights, I might introduce noise when I'm recovering the shadows. But with the A7R III, I do not need to worry about that. Just a bit of underexposure and I'm set. The highlights are completely protected, and even the really dark shadows are retrievable with minimal noise. The dynamic range of this camera is crazy good. I think this sensor can go head to head with any kind of camera out today if we are talking about photography. I can't imagine those new cameras being noticeably better in image quality. Plus, now that it is a bit older, it will be more affordable in the secondhand market and it won't depreciate in value as much as the newer cameras. Next is hybrid shooting. This is the first camera that I've owned that has a real video capability, a true hybrid camera. I heard some negative comments about this camera as a video camera. And I can see where they're coming from if they're used to cameras from Sony that are more skewed toward the video shooting experience. I believe that those cameras have 10-bit color while this has only 8-bit, and that is a huge difference in the camera world. And I believe those cameras can do 4K at 120, where this camera can only do full HD at 120. So if you want more of a video experience with just some photos, maybe you should go for other Sony cameras. But from what I've used and posted on YouTube, I have no complaints about the video quality. But keep in mind that I have never used a camera capable of 10-bit color or other Sony camera models that are dedicated video cameras. In my eyes, the photography with this camera is almost second to none, and the video capabilities are not bad at all. It is pretty great actually. So if you're a casual or semi-obsessed photographer with some video in mind, I can definitely recommend the R3. The next thing I like about this camera is the battery life. The battery just lasts forever. The only real chance of you really draining out the battery is to have it in video mode and keep shooting long videos. If you're out and about shooting some photos and some videos, you will not run out of battery. Me, shooting videos and photos while traveling, never really needed a second battery except for a handful of occasions. But I do have a third battery, not because I run out of battery life, but because maybe I forget to charge one of my batteries on rare occasions when I'm on a trip. And I found that one of my oldest battery only charges up to 80% when I'm using a dedicated charger, which is actually a known issue with the older batteries. In this case, the battery will only charge up to 100% if you charge it in your camera body. But I am against doing that. I've heard some horror stories on charging your battery in your camera, so always use a dedicated charger. I only carry a backup battery if I'm traveling and leaving my hotel early in the morning because I don't know when I'll be back. I will recommend the A7R III over the R2 solely based on the batteries because that is when the battery upgrade happened. Next thing I love about this camera is the continuous shooting and the processing capacity. When I'm traveling, I just burst shoot the hell out of this thing. I found that it can shoot about 30 raw photos at once. It does take a bit of processing for it to come back down to zero if I shoot this way. But if you think about it, processing 85 megabyte files at this speed is pretty great. And of course, you do not need for it to come back down to zero to shoot it again. But if you want to switch to video mode, you do need it to come back down to zero. If I compare this to when I used to shoot on Fuji X100T and Ricoh GR3X, it is night and day difference for the burst shooting speed and also the processing speed and how much you can process at once. You also need to know that the files coming out of this thing is more than 2 times larger than the files coming out of the cameras that I've mentioned, so it makes it that much more impressive. As long as you're ready to shoot, you will not miss a moment with the A7R III. Next is weather sealing. My favorite conditions to shoot at is rainy weather. I can tell you that this camera has been soaking wet in rainstorms and raindrops through mic holes and whatever holes it got, with no problems. Only problem I had is with one of my lenses that was not weather sealed, but the body never showed any problem. So you want to protect your lenses if they're not weather sealed. I've learned that the hard way. It never actually broke, but it was acting up by constantly making weird motor noises. But I've just put that lens away to dry and didn't use it for days, and it recovered, working in perfect condition again. Now that I've gone through the positive, let's go through what I don't love about this camera. First is the focus peaking not being accurate enough. I use a lot of vintage lenses with this camera, and I've learned that the focus assist or focus peaking of this camera is not accurate enough. It is only about 80% accurate, which is not great if you think about it because I'm using a Helios lens, which is a 58mm f2 lens, and I shoot wide open for the swirly bokeh. So the focus window is very shallow. So I really need a very accurate focus assist, but I feel like it is under the assumption that I'm on f8 or f5.6 where my focus window is pretty wide. So what ends up happening is I use the EVF with the magnifying feature to take a closer look to focus. So it always takes extra time. And most of the work I do is street photography, so I miss the decisive moment a lot. One trick I like to do is have my focus set to infinity with the background being photogenic. So I use the subjects as big foregrounds that can add to my photo. Or I use the fishing technique where I pre-focus to where I want the subject to be, and when they walk by that spot, I take the photo. But you cannot shoot like this all the time, so sometimes I just shoot while and as I'm focusing. I know when I'm very close to being in focus, so I just fire away as I'm focusing to have at least some shots in focus. I know this is not a great way to shoot, but it is what I've learned to do. Next is the lack of flip out screen. Probably my biggest hate with this camera is the non-flip out screen for vertical shooting. It is the only reason I dream about upgrading my camera. We live in a world of social media, so sometimes I like to shoot vertically. But what happens a lot is when you shoot above your head or from the hip and want to shoot vertically right after, the screen is caught in a weird position where you can't see the screen well. So you have to put back the screen in its place before shooting vertically. So it is bothersome. So sometimes if I want to switch to vertical right away, I go to using the EVF. But it does not let me look through the EVF if my screen is not fully folded back into the camera. So I can't do that either. So this camera does get in the way if you want to shoot vertically and at an angle. So that is something you want to consider before getting this camera. Next is the size. It is a larger camera. I can't recommend this camera to any beginner photographer because they will simply not carry it with them because of the size and weight. Me, being crazy about photography, I carry it pretty often, but as I'm getting used to my Ricoh GR3X, I carry it noticeably less now. Next is the large files. I use uncompressed RAW, and in this case, your file size is close to 85 megabytes, which is really large. And as I said before, I shoot in burst mode most of the time, so it is wasteful for storage and it is a work to find and erase a lot of the photos. And you do end up deleting a lot of photos compared to smaller files from other cameras just because it takes up a lot of space. So this is another aspect of this camera that you want to consider before buying. Next is no video while photo processing. This will probably be the same with all cameras out there, so I can't say this is a con for this camera alone. But I wish I could shoot videos while it is processing photos. Because when I use burst mode and then really need to shoot video as well, I have to wait quite a bit for it to finish processing all the photos before I can jump into video mode. So over the years, I've learned to just go on video mode first because when I finish up a video, the processing stops right then and there, so I can shoot photos right after. But that is not the case for the other way around. But all in all, this is a top-notch photography camera in my opinion, and a pretty good video camera. It still holds up to this day, and I never really see other camera and its image and see the need to upgrade just for the quality of the photo image. Of course, you might want the latest AI face detection and fancy features, but at the end of the day, that has little impact on the photo image itself. And this camera was the best photo camera when it first came out. It is only 6 years old, and not 16 years old. So it can still go head to head with any other camera out there. So if you really want the best quality but are on a budget and want the full frame experience, I really recommend this camera. You can't go wrong with it. Alright, that's it for the day. I post camera reviews and street photography POVs. So if you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel because it really helps out small channels like mine. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.